On a farm, somewhere in Africa, there lived three friends, a bird, a duck, and a rabbit. We only know the name of the rabbit, Robert, maybe because he is the hero of our story. Although we don't know the name of the bird, when we hear her in the music of the flute, we can look for her. There she is. See her high up in the sky, and now there, lower down, between the branches of the tree. The third friend was the duck, and we can know who he is by the funny way he waddles and by the quack, quack, quacking we hear from the trumpets. Every day, the three friends met for tea under a large baobab tree. After their tea, they played games together, and if one of them had a birthday, there would be a special cake and extra fun. One day, the bird came late, and her friends were about to start the party when they suddenly heard her calls. They saw her flying circles in the sky before she landed next to them, breathing heavily. She was very excited. "Sorry I'm late, but I've been listening to the radio. I heard a really wonderful story with beautiful music, and guess what? The story had a bird and a duck in it, so of course I waited to hear the end of the story." "What was the story about?" asked the duck. But the rabbit interrupted him. "Wasn't there a rabbit in the story?" he asked. "No, there was a wolf and a cat, but no rabbit." The bird saw that her friend Robert was upset. "Maybe there is some other music about a rabbit," she said. "You know, there are many stories about rabbits." "Yes, I know," said the rabbit, "but there's no music about a rabbit." The duck interrupted. "Well, maybe there is, but we just don't know about it. And if there really isn't, then maybe one day there will be." The duck looked very pleased with himself. The bird thought it best not to tell them that the duck was eaten by the wolf. She only told them that the story was about a boy named Peter who had caught a wolf in the forest with the help of a bird. She was, of course, very proud that it was a bird that helped to catch the wolf. "Wasn't it dangerous to go into the forest where there were wolves?" asked the rabbit. "Why didn't Peter's parents stop him?" "Don't know," said the bird. She was getting a little cross that her friend insisted on talking about the story. He hadn't even heard it. His grandfather told him not to go into the forest. Well, Peter should have listened. Had there been a rabbit there, he too would have told Peter not to go into the forest. We rabbits know how dangerous wolves are. In the end, the bird and Peter caught the wolf, but the bird still didn't tell her friends that the wolf had eaten the duck. "Anyway, what shall we play today?" Robert said, "Sorry, I really don't feel like playing today because I've a bit of a headache. But I'll be better by tomorrow." His friends understood how he was feeling, so they didn't argue with him. Each went home, the bird to her nest, the duck to his pond, and the rabbit to his burrow. The next day, Robert's friends were surprised and pleased to see that he was in a really cheerful mood. As soon as they sat down to tea, the rabbit asked, "What's the name of the man who wrote that story?" Of course, everybody knew which story he was talking about. "Prokofiev," answered the bird. "Prokofiev," repeated the rabbit. "That's quite a difficult name." "Yes, not everybody has an easy name like you, Robert, but that's his name." "Where does he live?" asked Robert the rabbit. "In a country called Russia," said the bird. "That's very far away. I'll get a map and show you." She flew back to the nest and came back with a map in her beak. She picked out a place on the map to show them where they were having their tea. This was quite near the bottom. "This is where we are." Then she picked out another place near the top of the map. "That's where Russia is," she said. "That is really a long way away," said the duck. "It's even too far for me to swim there." "Well, I'm going to go there," said the rabbit, "and I'll ask Mr. Prokofiev to put me in his music. Then we'll see some sense." "How could you possibly get there?" asked the bird crossly. The rabbit scratched a point on the map with his white paw. "I'll take a boat from here all the way up the coast of Africa, up to there. And then from there to there, it's not too far. Then, 1, 2, 3, I'm in Russia." "1, 2, 3, quacked the duck. 1, 2, 3. "Do you have any money for a boat?" asked the bird gently. The rabbit scratched his little black head. "No, but where there's a tail there's a way, and where there's a will there's a way." Robert knew that the farmer, Mr. Dlamini, who lived next door, sent a truck every morning to the nearby port. At the port, a boat would take the farmer's pineapples and mangoes and papaya all the way up the coast. So, later that evening, Robert hopped over to speak to the farmer. "Mr. Farmer, could you please give me a lift in your truck? Tomorrow morning I want to go to the port." "With pleasure, Robert. You be here bright and early and we'll go together." The next day, when the bird and duck came to their usual meeting place under the big tree, the rabbit wasn't there. Instead of their friend the rabbit, they found a large piece of paper, and on it their friend had written, "Gone to Russia to see Mr. whatever." The duck quacked. "He won't get very far if he can't even remember the man's name." "Oh, I think Robert remembers the man's name," said the bird. "He just doesn't know how to spell it." And where was Robert? Yes, you've guessed correctly. He'd gone early that morning to the house of Mr. Dlamini, who was already waiting for him in his enormous truck. As soon as Robert jumped in next to him, the farmer started to warm up the engine. Off they went, past fields and trees, and after a while it seemed as if the trees and fields were themselves travelling in the opposite direction. There was a lot of noise in the cabin of the truck, but Mr. Dlamini wasn't worried. He changed gears from time to time, turned the wheel to and fro, until soon enough they arrived at the port. There the truck stopped next to a large warehouse to offload the cases of fruit. This is as far as I go, Robert. Good luck with the rest of your journey, because of course Robert had told him that he wanted to go to Russia. "How will I get on the boat?" asked Robert, his voice trembling a little. "You'd better find the captain and ask him." "But how will I know who the captain is?" asked Robert. "Oh, he'll have a very fancy uniform with lots of stripes and maybe even a few medals. I suggest you try that boat over there," pointing in the direction of a very large ship. The port was also very large. Giant cranes lifted the goods to an enormous height before lowering them into the boats. So Robert hopped off in the direction of the ship that the farmer had pointed out. He waited patiently next to the gangplank of the ship until, sure enough, a man wearing a sparkling white uniform with lots of stripes on it started to walk up the gangplank. "Are you the captain?" squeaked Robert nervously. The captain looked down. He was rather surprised. He'd never heard a rabbit talk. "Yes, I'm the captain, and who are you?" "I'm Robert the Rabbit, and I want to go to Russia. Would you please take me on your boat?" The captain smiled. "I'm only going as far as England, and the people who go on this boat are people who've paid for the tickets or who work on the boat. Do you have a ticket?" "No," said Robert, "but I can be a worker." The captain laughed and laughed. "What work could you do?" Robert thought a while. "Are there any children among the passengers?" "Yes, of course. We've many families travelling with us and lots of children." "Well," said Robert, "children love playing with rabbits, and I could keep them happy during the long journey." The captain laughed again. "What a good idea." "Okay, Robert the Rabbit, welcome aboard." A long toot was sounded, and the boat left the harbour on its journey, over the ocean, which was sometimes smooth, but more often had high waves. During the long journey, Robert had his own little hutch. It wasn't a very comfortable journey because sometimes the sea was really stormy. Robert, who'd never been on a ship before, was often seasick. He also missed his own friends back in Africa. He wondered what they were doing and if they were still having tea parties under the baobab tree. However, he felt better when the children visited him every day to feed him lettuce and carrots and, of course, to play with him. Even if he sometimes regretted that he decided to make the journey, he kept on telling himself that he had to make Mr. Prokofiev change the story. You see, Robert loved children and he was worried about them. What if children would follow Peter's example and go wandering off into dangerous woods by themselves? That's why he was prepared to make this long and difficult journey. Children may not listen to their grandparents, but they would certainly listen to a rabbit. At the end of the voyage, the children made a farewell party for him with balloons, drums, and toy trumpets. Robert was very grateful, but he did wish they could be a bit quieter. After all, he was not so young anymore. He packed his little bag with some spare carrots and lettuces and was about to leave the ship when the captain came to speak to him. "Come, Robert, you can't get to Russia by yourself. I'm going to take you to a friend of mine who's the captain of a boat going to Russia." And so a few days later, the rabbit landed at a beautiful city in Russia which is today called St. Petersburg. He had never seen such a large city before. As soon as he arrived on dry land, he hopped around from person to person until he found somebody who could speak English and who could help him to find the nearest post office. It was not easy because of all the enormous wide streets, and he had to take care not to fall in one of the many canals. Why was he looking for a post office? Well, he wanted to send a postcard to his friends to tell them that he'd arrived in Russia and that he was going to see Mr. P. He decided that the name was really too long to write on a small postcard. Also, we must admit, he wanted to leave enough place on the postcard to boast to his friends about his adventures. Eventually he found a post office, and after writing his postcard, he asked the lady behind the counter, "Can you tell me how to get to Mr. Prokofiev?" You see, Robert did know the name, he just didn't know how to spell it. Fortunately, the lady in the post office could speak some English, although not very well. "You mean composer?" asked the lady, amused at being asked a question about Prokofiev by Rabbit. "I'm sorry, Mr. Prokofiev used to be living here when he was a boy, but now he living in Moscow." Robert's face grew sad. His long ears drooped. "Is that very far? I've already come all the way from Africa." "Yes, I'm sorry it's a long way, but you can get there by train. Don't worry. Post office is closing in a few minutes, and I take you to the train station." At the station, there amongst all the puffing and snorting trains, she pointed to the one that was going to leave for Moscow that very evening. "Good luck, Mr. Rabbit," and she gave him some sandwiches left over from her lunch. Robert looked at the large train and thought, "How will I get the driver to take me to Moscow? Still, I must try. I can't give up now after coming so far." So he looked for the man with the most stripes. "Excuse me, sir. Are you the captain of this train, and do you speak English?" "Well," said the man, "trains don't have captains. I'm the chief porter. How can I help you?" Robert explained he wanted to go to Moscow to see Mr. Prokofiev. "Well," said the man with the uniform, "I'm afraid you either need a ticket or to work for the railroad." The rabbit sighed. "You may not be a captain, but you gave me the same answer as the captain on the ship from Africa." "A rabbit travels all the way from Africa to Russia by himself? Amazing!" "Yes," said the rabbit, and he explained what he'd done on the boat. "We haven't any children on this trip, but I have another idea. Do you think that you could chase mice?" Robert had no idea if he could chase mice, but he immediately said, "Yes, of course." "Well," said the porter, "you can be a worker for the Russian railways. You can stay on the train and chase away any mice that you see." "Thank you very much," said Robert as he hopped on board. He hoped that he wouldn't meet a mouse, because he wasn't sure what he'd do if he saw one. Then there was a long, loud whistle, and the train started to move. At first it moved slowly and heavily, as if the engine felt that it really couldn't manage to pull so much weight. But then, slowly, slowly, it gathered more and more power and traveled faster and faster. As it left the city, it was already going at full speed, and Robert pressed his nose to the window and looked in amazement at the Russian scenery. You may ask, what about the work that Robert was supposed to be doing? He did in fact see one small mouse, but it was as frightened as Robert and jumped off at the next station. A few hours later, Robert himself got off at the train at the main station of Moscow. The head porter suggested that Robert speak to somebody at the information office, where they could answer all kinds of questions. Robert was told that Mr. Prokofiev had a dacha in a large forest just outside Moscow. A dacha is a wooden house that Russian people use when they go on holiday. The man behind the desk took out a large map and showed Robert, "Here is where we are, and over there to the north is the forest where many famous writers and musicians have their dachas. I'm sure that you'll find Mr. Prokofiev there. Do you know, he once wrote a famous piece of music called Peter and the Wolf." Yes, yes, said Robert. I know all about it. That's why I'm here. But how will I get there? Obviously, I need to take a car or a bus, but how will I get them to take me to the forest of the dachas? Outside the train station stood a row of buses, and at last he saw a bus going in the direction of the forest. But as he was hopping towards it, oh dear, it left without him. He didn't see any other buses or cars, so he said to himself, "Even if I have to walk, I will get there, I will." But it was lonely on the road to the forest, and it wasn't easy to hop through the snow. It was getting really cold, and the snow had started to fall quite heavily. He was really quite miserable, when all of a sudden he heard beautiful music from afar, which seemed to be getting stronger and stronger. Was it getting closer? Yes, it was coming in his direction, and then he saw a strange kind of cart or carriage with 3 horses harnessed to it. He really didn't know what to call it, because he'd never seen anything like that in his life. First of all, it didn't have wheels. Whoever heard of a cart or a carriage without wheels? So how did it travel, you may ask? Very simple. It slid on the snow by using giant skis instead of wheels, and is pulled by the 3 horses. It's called a troika, and it can go just as fast as a carriage on wheels. And sitting at the back was the man playing the beautiful music he'd just heard on an instrument called the balalaika. When the troika suddenly stopped, Robert thought, if I jump on, maybe he's going to continue on this road to the other side of the forest, where I'll find Mr. Prokofiev's dacha. So he jumped on the troika. "What are you doing here, Rabbit?" asked the driver. "Please, sir, can you take me to the other side of the forest, somewhere close to the dacha of Mr. Prokofiev?" "Well, you're in luck, Mr. Rabbit. That's exactly where we're going," said the balalaika player. The driver nodded in agreement, and because he saw that Robert was shivering, he gave him a little blanket to wrap himself. "You need this because we travel very fast and it gets very windy." The driver picked up his whip and gave the horses a little flick. With a "Dio, Dio," he cried. The Troika continued on its journey, speeding past the snowy forest while Robert sat quietly in his corner, eating his carrot and enjoying the sight of the beautiful snow-laden trees. Eventually, they reached the other side of the forest, and Robert saw large, beautiful datchas in a circle. "You'll find Mr. Prokofiev's dacha over there," pointed the driver. "The cottage with the red roof. As you know, he likes animals, so you're really in luck." Robert waved goodbye to his new friends and hopped off in the direction of Mr. Prokofiev's cottage. He saw some children playing near the dacha and wanted to be certain that he was going to the right one. So he asked them, "Is this where Mr. Prokofiev lives?" The children were very excited at hearing a talking rabbit, and they said, "Yes, that's the one over there with the red roof, and you can hear somebody playing on the piano inside." One of the older children said, "I think he's writing a new composition for children." Robert thanked them, and they all called out, "Goodbye, goodbye, and good luck." What would the bird and duck say now? They would be so jealous. But we must admit, Robert had every reason to be proud of himself. There was a big fence around the cottage, but nothing could stop our Robert now. He found a hole, dug a little, and crawled underneath. He soon found himself at the front door of the cottage. There was a bell there, but it was too high to reach, so he turned around and with his tail thwacked the door a couple of times. The door was hard, and it hurt the rabbit a little, but he didn't mind because at last he was going to meet Mr. Prokofiev. And sure enough, a middle-aged man opened the door and peered out through his thick glasses. "Who's there?" he asked, because of course he couldn't see the rabbit, way down at his feet. "Hello, Mr. Prokofiev," called up Robert the rabbit. "I'm Robert the rabbit, and I've come to see you. I've come all the way from Africa." "Well, well, come inside. I don't want people to see me talking to a rabbit, because then they will think that they can come and visit me. And I'm rather busy writing some new music." "Thank you," said the rabbit. "It's about music that I've come to see you." "What? Are you also a composer?" asked Mr. Prokofiev, rubbing his bald head and polishing his glasses to have a better look at this extraordinary rabbit. "No, I've come to see you about some music that you wrote." "Peter and the Wolf," said Robert. "Yes, you know Peter and the Wolf? I wrote that for my grandchildren. I hope you like it." Robert didn't want to tell him that he hadn't even heard the music, so he quickly said, "There's something wrong with it." "My word," said Mr. Prokofiev. "Tell me, what's wrong with my music?" There's no rabbit in it." "Ah," said the composer, "is that why you've come to see me?" "Yes," said Robert. "You see, I've got these good friends at home. One is a bird, and the other one is a duck. And I know they're both in the story, so I'm very sad that I'm not in it. So I thought you could add a little bit to the story to put me in as well." "What an interesting idea," said Mr. Prokofiev. "Come, have a cup of tea, and I'll think about it." They went through to the kitchen where the composer helped Robert sit on a stool and served him some tea and carrots. "You know," Mr. Prokofiev said, "there are many other animals that aren't in my story. Think of all the other animals in the world that aren't in my story. I can't put them all in." "Yes," said Robert, "I know that, but none of them has come all the way from Africa to ask you to be in the story. And if there was a rabbit in the story, then he would have told Peter not to go into the forest, but to listen to his grandfather. You wouldn't let your grandchildren into a forest where there were wolves, would you?" Mr. Prokofiev laughed. "That's true. Peter's own grandfather told him not to go. Let's see what we can do." So he went to the piano in the next room, and Robert heard him play all sorts of melodies. Mr. Prokofiev came back after a few minutes. "I'll tell you what, Robert, I admire you so much for having made this journey all by yourself, especially to see me. So either I or somebody else will write some music just for you." And that's exactly what happened. He went to his piano again, and as Mr. Prokofiev played, suddenly Robert was sure that he could hear music for a rabbit. How happy he was! It had been worthwhile to make that long journey from Africa in a truck, a boat, by train, by troika. And even walking in the snow. I hear my rabbit music. But we mustn't forget Robert's friends, the bird, and the duck, And a big, big thank you to Mr. Prokofiev.